galaxy witnessed the most intense human moment. The galactic census ship had been cataloging dead zones for 6 months when it picked up the anomaly. Dead zones were exactly what the name said. Regions of space where nothing worth recording had happened in so long that the census ships came through once every 50 years, logged the same quiet nothing, and moved on. The outer reach of the Carina Belt was one of the oldest dead zones on record. The last interesting thing that had happened there was a star going cold 200 years ago. Senior cataloger Fenn pressed 2 of his 4 hands against his console and stared at the reading. It was not a star. It was not a ship. It was not a debris field or a gravitational anomaly or any of the 47 categories he was trained to identify. It was a sound. Not a radio signal. Not a structured transmission. A sound traveling through the vacuum in a way that sounds were not supposed to travel, at a frequency that should not have been audible to any species with ears. And yet every single crew member on the census ship had turned their head toward the same wall at the same moment without anyone saying a word. His co-cataloger, a young Marathi named Sil who had been on her first assignment and had not yet learned to be professionally unmoved by things, was standing in the middle of the room with her hands pressed over her mouth. "What is that?" she said, though it came out muffled. Fenn pulled the frequency analysis. It took the system 4 minutes to return a result, which was 3.5 minutes longer than usual. The result said, origin unknown, pattern unclassified, closest match in database, human vocal production, category unspecified. Fenn looked at the result. Then he looked at the wall everyone had turned toward. Then he pulled up the star charts for the outer reach and found what he was looking for immediately, because he had not needed to look hard. 3 light towers away, there was a planet. A small one, rocky, thin atmosphere. It had been flagged on the census rolls as uninhabited, then reflagged 40 years ago as containing a small human research station, then forgotten about in the way that small human research stations tended to be forgotten about in dead zones. He pulled the station's last communication log. The most recent entry was 14 months old. That was wrong. Human stations were required to file status reports every 30 days. 14 months of silence meant something had gone badly, or the station had been abandoned, or both. He filed an alert to the nearest response hub, which was 11 days away at standard speed. Then he pointed the ship's long-range audio array at the planet and turned up the gain, and the sound came in properly for the first time, and every person on the ship went very still. It was a voice, one voice singing. The song was low and repetitive, the kind of melody that did not seem to be going anywhere and did not seem to care about that. It circled back on itself every few measures. It had no urgency. It had no distress signal patterns woven into it. It was simply a person, alone on a rocky planet in a dead zone, singing as if singing was the only reasonable thing left to do. Sil had taken her hands away from her mouth. She looked at Fenn. "How long have they been down there?" she said. Fenn checked the math against the last log entry. "At minimum," he said, 14 months. Sil sat down. The census ship changed course. Fenn filed a second alert marked urgent, which would reach the response hub faster than the first but still not fast enough for his taste. Then he sat back in his chair and listened to the voice coming up from the planet below and tried to build a picture of what 14 months alone on a dead world research station looked like, and found he could not complete it. The Marathi were social creatures. They became ill without regular contact. 30 days of isolation produced measurable psychological deterioration. 60 days was considered a medical crisis. 14 months was a number his training did not have a response for. And yet the voice below was not deteriorating. It was not ragged or broken or desperate. It was singing the same low, unhurried loop it had been singing when they first picked it up, as if the person attached to it had made peace with something a very long time ago and had simply been living inside that peace ever since. Syl was listening with her eyes closed. The Marathi processed sound deeply, more deeply than most species, and when something moved them, they went inward to meet it. "They sound okay," she said quietly, which was not a professional assessment and she knew it. "They are alive," Finn said, which was all he could confirm. He began the atmospheric entry sequence. The ship was not a rescue vessel. It did not have a full medical bay or a stasis unit or any of the equipment a proper response team would bring. What it had was a cataloging bay, a functional kitchen, 2 crew medic kits, and 2 people who had not been trained for this, and were going to do it anyway because the alternative was circling at altitude for 11 days, and listening to one voice fill a dead zone with sound. As they descended, the signal grew stronger. Fenn boosted the translation layer, and the words of the song came through for the first time. It was not a human cultural song he recognized from the database. It was not a distress message coded into a melody. It was a list. The person below was singing a list, quietly, in a loop, of things they were going to do when they got home. See the sky when it rains. Eat something with salt. Sit next to someone. Just sit next to someone and not talk. The cloud layer broke. The planet's surface came into view, gray rock, thin amber light, and in the middle of a flat stretch near a cluster of low-built research structures, a single human figure sitting on a boulder, face tilted up, watching something come down from the sky. Fenn opened the comm. "Human station," he said formally, because he had been trained to be formal in first contact situations, and he was going to hold onto that for as long as he could. "This is Galactic Census Vessel 7 Karen. We are responding to a missed communication log. Please identify." The singing stopped. A pause. Then a voice, rough from long use in thin air, came back up through the comm with no ceremony at all. "Took you long enough," it said. And then, after a moment, in a way that made Syl press her hand over her mouth again for completely different reasons than before. "I made a list of everything I want to do when I get back. I've been adding to it." Fenn did not know what to say to that. Syl was already crying, quietly, the way Marathi cry when something lands somewhere deep, and they have not had time to prepare a wall for it. The ship touched down on gray rock, and the door opened, and the human outside stood up from their boulder and looked at them with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time and had decided, somewhere along the way, that waiting was simply what they were going to do until the waiting was done. The human's name was Aura. She was 34 years old, which Fenn would not have guessed from looking at her. She was lean in the way that people get lean when food has been rationed for a long time, and her hair had grown well past her shoulders, and she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned to spend energy like currency when there was not much of it. But her eyes were sharp and her voice was steady, and when she shook Fenn's hand, she did it with a firmness that surprised him. The research station had been built for a team of 8. Aura had been the only one left in it for 14 months. Fenn found this out in the first 10 minutes, sitting at the station's small central table while Syl quietly went through the medical kit, and Aura drank water from a cup she kept refilling, slowly, as if she was reminding herself that she could. The team had evacuated after a structural failure in the station's lower section. A slow crack in the foundation layer, caught late. Emergency protocol required full evacuation until a repair team certified the structure. The evacuation window had been tight. A supply ship, passing through, had taken the other 7. Aura had stayed. "Why?" Fenn said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had answered this question many times in their own head and had arrived at the same place every time. "The long-range scanner array," she said. "It takes 6 weeks to properly calibrate. We had been working on it for almost 5 months. If we all left, the calibration reset. Everything we had done would be gone." She paused. "And the supply ship only had room for 7. "Only room for 7, Fenn repeated. There were 8 of us, Aura said. Someone had to make the call. That- She said it the way someone says a thing that is completely settled inside them. Not proudly, not with the weight of suffering, just as a fact, the way facts are when you have lived inside them long enough that they stop being dramatic. Syl had stopped pretending to sort the medical kit. She was listening. You volunteered, Fen said. I was the only one without someone waiting, Aura said. She refilled her water cup. That made it simple. Fen processed that. Among the Marathi, the one without someone waiting would be the one the group closed around. Loss of social bond was loss of function. You did not leave the isolated one behind. You reorganized everything to keep them in the circle. He tried to reconcile that with what Aura had just described, a human woman doing the math of her own aloneness and using it as a reason to stay, and finding the two things would not sit in the same frame together. You were alone for 14 months, he said. 13 and a half, she said. The first 2 weeks the repair team was supposed to come, and I thought they might actually come, so those don't quite count. And then they did not come. A routing error. My signal got filed under the wrong zone. I kept sending status reports. They kept going to the wrong hub. She paused. For about the first 4 months I was fairly angry about that. And after 4 months, Syl said from across the room, unable to help herself. Aura looked at her. Something in Aura's face softened slightly, the way things soften when they recognize a genuine question. After 4 months, I decided being angry at a routing error was not a useful way to spend time, so I stopped. She said it simply. She did not make it sound like an achievement. She said it the way someone says they switched from tea to water because water was what they had. Fen pulled up the station's internal logs with her permission. He wanted to understand how she had spent 14 months alone on a gray rock in the dead zone of the Carina Belt, and the logs were the most direct path to that. What he found did not match anything in his training on human behavioral decline under prolonged isolation. The logs were meticulous. Every 30 days, a full status report filed faithfully to the wrong hub, written in clean, careful language. Every week, a maintenance log of every system in the station checked and updated. Every day, a personal log entry. He read some of the personal entries. They were not what he expected. Day 47, fixed the seal on the secondary water tank. Took most of the morning. Good problem to have. Made extra rations for dinner as a reward, which is a small deception since I decide both the challenge and the reward, but it worked anyway. Day 183, watched the meteor shower from the roof for 3 hours. Brought a blanket. Counted 41. There was one that was green, which I have never seen before. Added it to the list. Day 291. The scanner array finished its 6th calibration cycle today. The data is the cleanest I have ever seen from this type of equipment. No one will know it was just me doing it, but I will know. That is enough. Fen stopped on that last entry. He read it again. No one will know it was just me doing it, but I will know. That is enough. He looked up at Aura, who was watching him read with the expression of someone who is not embarrassed by what is in there, but has forgotten what it is like to be seen by another person. The scanner array, he said, you finished it. Cycle 9 completed 4 days ago, she said. The data is all stored, the whole reason we came here. You kept working, he said, the whole time. What else was I going to do, she said. It was not a rhetorical question. She genuinely meant it. She had been given a task and she had been alone, and the task had not changed just because the people had left, so she had continued doing the task. That was the whole of it. Syl had sat down at the table. She was not pretending to do anything else anymore. She had her hands folded, and she was looking at Aura with the wide, focused attention of a young Marathi who has just encountered something her education did not prepare her for. Were you scared? Syl asked. Aura considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. At the start, she said, and sometimes after, in the middle of the night a few times. When the power grid ran low in month 7, that was a bad week. She looked at her water cup. But mostly I was just busy. Staying busy was a choice I made early and I kept making it. Outside the station windows, the amber light was beginning to fade toward evening. Fenn had filed his third alert update. Priority escalated. Repair and retrieval team now formally requested. The response hub had confirmed receipt. A proper team would arrive in 9 days. 9 more days. He looked at Aura. She was still drinking water slowly, steadily, as if making up for 14 months of rationing 1 cup at a time. She did not look like someone counting 9 days. She looked like someone who had already learned that counting days was not how you got through them. "You can come aboard the ship," Fenn said. "You do not have to stay in the station." Aura looked at the station around her. The low ceilings, the gray walls. She had been inside for longer than most people lasted in spaces like this. Then she looked at the census ship sitting outside the window on the gray rock. "Is there somewhere to sit next to someone," she said, "and not talk?" Syl stood up. "Yes," she said, "come on." They went together, and Fenn watched them go. And then he sat alone in the research station for a few minutes in the quiet that Aura had been sitting inside for 14 months. And he lasted about 90 seconds before he had to get up and follow them, because the quiet was the loudest thing he had ever been in. Fenn filed his incident report that night. It was a standard form, 6 sections. He had filled out hundreds of them. Section 1 was location data, Section 2 was event classification, Section 3 was responding crew actions, Section 4 was subject status, Section 5 was immediate needs assessment, Section 6 was additional notes. He filled Sections 1 through 5 without stopping. Then he got to Section 6. He sat looking at the blank field for a long time. The additional notes section was technically optional. Most experienced catalogers left it empty or put a single line. Fenn had never written more than 2 sentences in it in 11 years. He wrote for 40 minutes. He wrote about the sound that had come through the wall of a census ship in a dead zone where sounds were not supposed to travel. He wrote about the frequency analysis that could not classify what it was hearing and kept returning the phrase closest match. Human vocal production, category unspecified. He wrote about a voice singing a list of ordinary things through thin air on a gray rock planet and what that list had contained. He wrote about the daily logs. He wrote the entry about the meteor shower word for word. He wrote the one about the water tank seal and the self-awarded extra ration. He wrote the one about the scanner array calibration, and he quoted the last line directly because he could not find a way to paraphrase it that kept its shape intact. "No one will know it was just me doing it, but I will know. That is enough." He submitted the report and went to find Syl. She was in the small common room of the census ship, sitting across from Aura. They were not talking. Aura had a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of something warm, and was sitting in a way that suggested she had not been in a comfortable chair in a very long time, and was not going to take it for granted. Syl was doing what Syl did when something had gotten inside her, which was sit quietly and look at her hands and be very still. Fenn made himself a drink and sat down too. They stayed that way for a while. It was not uncomfortable. It was the particular comfortable silence of people who do not need to perform being okay at each other. After a while Aura said, "What are the 2 of you exactly?" "Galactic Census," Fenn said. "I know that. I mean, what do you actually do?" "We go to quiet places," Syl said, "and record what is there." Aura considered this. "You are very far from anywhere." "Dead zone rotation," Fenn said. "This belt had not been surveyed in 40 years. 40 years, Aura said. She looked out the small porthole at the dark. "The census before you, would they have come to this planet?" "At some point during their rotation, yes." "And if I had been here then?" Fenn calculated. Roughly 36 years from now would have been the next scheduled survey pass. Aura nodded slowly. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Good thing you picked up the singing." "Yes," Fen said, "good thing." Syl looked up from her hands. "How did you decide to start singing?" She said, "Specifically outside, on the boulder." Aura looked at her. The question seemed to reach somewhere. "Month 4, she said. "When I stopped being angry at the routing error, I had to replace the anger with something. The station had started to feel too much like a box I was inside of. I needed to be outside of it sometimes, even when outside was cold and gray and had nothing good about it, just to remember that the box was not all there was." She paused. "And I sing when I think. I always have. So I went outside and sat on the boulder and I sang." "Every day," Syl said. "Most days." "The song with the list," Syl said. "When did that start?" Aura's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. "Month 6. I started keeping a mental list of everything I was going to do when I got home, but I kept forgetting things overnight and I could not always get to the log to write them down, so I put them in the song, so I would not lose them." Fen thought about this. A practical solution to a practical problem. That was how she had described everything. The anger replaced with a decision. The isolation replaced with work. The forgetting replaced with a song. Every problem met with the quietest, most sensible response available and then moved past. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Aura looked at him. "In 13.5 months, was there a moment where you considered stopping? Not the work, yourself." It was a direct question, and he was not sure it was appropriate, and he asked it anyway because he needed to know. Aura did not flinch from it. She sat with it for a moment the way she sat with everything, calmly, as if the question deserved her actual attention rather than a quick answer. "Month 8, she said, "the power grid issue. 3 days where I was not sure the heating was going to hold. It was the first time I thought the situation might actually be stronger than I was." She looked at her cup. "I spent those 3 days working on the power grid. That is all I did. I did not sing. I did not log. I just fixed the problem. By day 4 the grid was stable and I had not stopped yet, so I did not stop." "It was the work that held you," Fen said. "It was always the work," she said. "And the list, I kept adding things to the list. Every time I thought about not continuing, I would add something to the list. Something small, something I actually wanted. Salt on food, rain, sitting next to someone." She looked at Syl. "You should know that you are currently on my list." Syl looked startled. "I am on your list?" "Sitting next to someone and not talking," Aura said. "That was on the list. This is it. You are it." Syl looked at Fen with the expression of someone who has just been handed something they do not know how to hold, but absolutely intend to hold carefully. Fen's incident report was already moving through the census network toward the central archive. It would arrive in 17 hours. It was flagged for review because of the length of the additional notes section, which was 6 times longer than any notes Fen had ever submitted in his career. He did not know yet what would happen when it arrived. He did not know who would read it or what they would do with it, or whether anyone would care about a short field report from a dead zone in the Carina Belt about a human woman who had been alone for 13.5 months and had filled the time with work and a song and a list of small, ordinary things to return to. He only knew that he had needed to write it. That felt like the right instinct. Outside the porthole, the dead zone sat quiet as it always had. But it was not quite as quiet as it had been yesterday. The incident report reached the census archive in 17 hours, as Fen had calculated. It was reviewed by a senior archivist named Paul, a Kwarathi of considerable experience who had processed census reports for 22 years and had developed a fast and reliable method of pulling the relevant data from each one and filing the rest. He opened Fen's report expecting the standard dead zone pass. Nothing found, coordinates logged, next survey in 40 years. He read the additional notes section. Then he read it again. Then he forwarded it to his direct supervisor with a subject line that read simply, "You should read this one. His supervisor was a Therali named Bren, broad-shouldered and precise, who had overseen the census archive for 9 years and whose job largely consisted of approving things her staff had already correctly decided. She read Fenn's report during her morning review. She did not approve it and move on. She sat with it. She pulled up the original incident, the audio fragment that Fenn had attached to the file. She listened to the sound that had come through the wall of the census ship in a frequency that should not have been transmittable, the low, unhurried loop of a voice on a gray rock planet singing a list of ordinary things. She listened to it twice. Then she did something she had not done in 9 years of managing an archive of 40,000 reports. She sent it to someone outside the department. The someone was an academic named Gull, a Veth researcher who studied what her field called resilience biology across species, specifically the question of what different species did when their environment became incompatible with continued functioning. It was a narrow and somewhat grim research focus, but Gull had devoted 20 years to it because she found the answers consistently surprising in ways she had not expected. Bren's message to Gull was 2 sentences: read the attached, particularly the additional notes. Gull read it in her research office on the Veth home station. She was eating her midday meal, and she stopped eating and did not finish it. She pulled the audio fragment too. She listened to it. The voice was not dramatic. It was not heroic. It was not the voice of someone performing endurance for an audience. It was the voice of a person who had made a quiet arrangement with a difficult situation and was living inside that arrangement without complaint, because complaint was not useful and she had decided early on what was useful and what was not. Gull set down the rest of her meal and began writing. She was a researcher. Writing was how she thought. She wrote about what she knew from 20 years of studying how different species responded to prolonged isolation and environmental adversity. She wrote about the patterns she had observed, the timelines of deterioration, the points at which different species reached what her research called the threshold of unsustainability, the moment where the gap between what the environment provided and what the organism needed became too wide to cross. For the Marathi, that threshold came at 60 days. For the Veth, it came at 90. For the Kwarathi, who were more internally self-sufficient than most, it came at around 120 days under ideal conditions of continued cognitive engagement. The human in the report had been alone for 415 days. Gull looked at that number for a long time. She had seen outlier data before. She had seen cases where individuals from various species exceeded their species' threshold under specific conditions. But 415 days was not an outlier in the way that research outliers usually worked. It was a different category of thing entirely. It was not that the human had exceeded her threshold. It was that the evidence in the report suggested she had never reached it. The work had continued. The logs had remained orderly and observant. The mood in the daily entries had moved and shifted the way mood in any person's diary moves and shifts, but it had not collapsed. Month 8 had been hard. She had written so herself, but hard in the way problems are hard before you solve them, not in the way that a species in threshold failure describes the same period. In the song, Gull kept coming back to the song. The song was not a coping mechanism in the clinical sense. Coping mechanisms were responses to damage already done. This was something else. This was something she had chosen in month 4 before the worst of it had arrived, as a structure, a practice, a way of being inside the difficulty rather than fighting it from outside. She had used the song to hold her list, the list of small, ordinary things, the list that kept getting longer. Gull sent a message to Bren. She wanted the full log archive from the station, every entry. She wanted to read all of it. Bren approved the request the same day and forwarded it to Fenn, who forwarded it to Aura, who agreed without hesitation. 3 days later, Gull had the logs. There were 415 daily entries. She read all of them. It took 2 full working days. She did not do any other work during those 2 days. On the second evening, she wrote to Bren again. She wrote, "I have studied resilience biology for 20 years. I have published 14 papers on threshold behavior across registered species. I need you to understand that I am about to change the focus of my research. Not adjust it, change it. What is in these logs is not what I have been looking at. I have been looking at how species survive. This is something different. This is a study in why one species, apparently, never seems to finish deciding to continue." Bren read the message and forwarded it, without comment, back to Fen. Fen read it on the census ship, where Aura was still waiting for the retrieval team. He showed it to Syl. They both read it. Then they looked at Aura, who was at the table writing in her personal log with a plain stylus, the same way she had written every evening for 415 days, because the habit did not stop just because someone had finally come. She had not asked them what they were reading. She would not. She did not consider herself a subject of interest. She considered herself a person who had stayed to finish a job and was now filling in the part of her log she had not written yet today. Fen watched her write and did not interrupt her. Some things you watch and do not interrupt. The retrieval team arrived on day 9, as promised. There were 6 of them on a mid-range service vessel, efficient and professional, with a medical officer and a structural repair crew, and a very organized team lead named Dar who handed Aura a formal release form and a health evaluation questionnaire in the first 3 minutes. Aura filled out the questionnaire at the station table, while Dar watched, with the polite concern of someone trained to observe without appearing to observe. The questionnaire was designed for humans returning from extended isolation. It had been written by a team of human and galactic medical professionals and contained 48 questions covering psychological state, physical condition, social reintegration readiness, and what the form called cognitive continuity, which was the clinical measure of whether a person's sense of self had remained intact under prolonged stress. Aura answered all 48 questions. It took 12 minutes. She handed the form back to Dar. Dar read it over. Then she read it again. Then she looked at Aura with the expression of someone whose professional expectation has been interrupted by something that does not fit the template. "These responses," Dar said carefully, "you are certain they are accurate?" "Yes," Aura said. "The scale for psychological distress. You marked 2 out of 10 for the worst period." "Month 8, Aura said. "The power grid. I marked 2 because it was genuinely difficult, but it was also solvable, so I did not think it warranted higher. I may have the scale wrong." Dar looked down at the form. The scale goes from 1, no distress, to 10, crisis level. A 2 is considered mild situational stress. "Then 2 is correct," Aura said. Dar sat down. The medical officer, who had been standing near the door, quietly pulled out his own notepad and began writing. It was not standard procedure for the medical officer to take independent notes during the questionnaire review. He was supposed to wait for the team lead's assessment before beginning his evaluation. But Dr. Wen had been a field medic for 18 years, first with the Thorali Joint Forces and then with the Census Retrieval Service, and he had seen what extended isolation did to people from a dozen different species, including humans, and what he was currently looking at did not match any of those experiences. The humans he had retrieved from extended isolation situations had all followed a recognizable pattern. There was a point of visible damage, a mark left by the time, even in the strongest and most functional cases. Something in the posture, or the response speed, or the way they managed eye contact, or the particular tension in how they held questions before answering them. Aura was answering questions the way someone answers questions when they have nothing to hide, and nothing to perform, and nothing to prove, which was the way most people answered questions on day 1 of anything, before difficulty had left its marks. He wrote that down. He wrote about the questionnaire responses. He wrote about the station logs, which Fenn had shared with the team during the 9-day wait, and which the whole retrieval team had read during the transit. He noted that the handwriting and the physical portions of the daily log had not changed significantly from the first month to the last. In cases of psychological deterioration under isolation, handwriting was one of the first things to shift. Changes in pressure, spacing, character formation. A record you could not fake. Aura's handwriting had gotten slightly smaller in month 11, which she attributed in the log to switching to a new stylus with a finer tip. That was all. The repair crew had gone down to the station's lower section to begin the structural assessment. Syl had stayed, not as part of the retrieval team, but because Fenn had requested she remain for continuity and the team lead had agreed, and because Syl had spent 9 days aboard the census ship with Aura and was not ready to move to the edge of what was happening. Aura was now standing at the station's window looking out at the gray rock, and the amber light, for what everyone understood without being told, was the last time. Syl stood beside her. "Are you going to miss it?" Syl said. Aura thought about it. "I am going to miss the meteor shower," she said. "The one in month 6, the green one, I do not think I will see that again anywhere." She paused. "And the quiet, not the lonely quiet, the other kind, when you have been working all day and the station settles at night and it is just you and the work you did and there is nothing else asking anything of you." She paused again. "I will miss that for a while." Syl was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask about the list?" "You are already on the list," Aura said. "You can ask anything." "Have you been adding to it these past 9 days?" Aura smiled, the first full unguarded smile Syl had seen from her. "Every day," she said. "The list got very long this week." "What did you add?" Aura looked at her. "Syl on this list," she said. "Fenn. The way Fenn pretended not to care about anything and then read my whole personal log and then wrote 40 minutes of notes about it." She looked back at the window. "That moment on day 1 when the ship came down through the clouds and I saw it and I thought, it is a census ship. They are not even rescue people, they are census people, and they came anyway because I was on their route. I'm going to think about that for a long time." Syl did not say anything. The Marathi were not good at receiving things like this cleanly. They felt them too much. Dr. Wen was still writing. The report he was building would take him 2 weeks to finish after they returned to the hub. It would be 30 pages. It would be submitted to the Galactic Medical Review Board as a case study under the heading Anomalous Resilience in Prolonged Human Isolation. Observations from the Carina Dead Zone Survey. He would later say in an interview, when the report had gone further than any medical case study he had written before, that the hardest part of writing it was that he could not find the mechanism. In every other case of extraordinary resilience he had studied, there was a mechanism, a specific coping structure, a community anchor, a belief system, a survival imperative, something to point to and say, this is the thing that held. With Aura there were many small things: the work, the song, the list, the daily log, the meteor shower and the decision to bring a blanket, the extra rations as a self-awarded prize for fixing a water seal, the decision in month 4 to stop being angry and replace the anger with something useful. None of them were extraordinary on their own. Every species had some version of all of them. But put together, the way she had put them together, one small deliberate choice after another for 415 days, as if each day she had simply looked at the day and asked what the most reasonable way to live inside it was and then done that, without drama, without performance, without waiting for someone to witness it. That was the thing he could not name, and naming things was how medicine worked. He wrote it down anyway, unnamed, because some things are worth recording before you understand them. Outside, the gray rock caught the last of the amber light. Inside, Aura took one last look at the window and turned away from it. "Ready," she said. And they went. Dr. Wen's report was published 6 weeks after the retrieval. It went through standard peer review at the Galactic Medical Review Board, which usually took 4 months. The board moved it through in 3 weeks, which was the fastest any submission had been processed in the board's history, because 3 of the 7 review panel members contacted the editor independently to say they felt the delay of standard timeline was not appropriate for this particular paper. None of them could fully articulate why. The editor, who had been managing the board's submissions for 12 years and had seen researchers become passionate about their work many times before, read the paper herself and understood. She published it with an editor's note, something she had done twice in 12 years. The note said only, "This paper describes something that does not yet have a name. The board considers that a reason to publish it sooner, not later." The paper moved through the galactic academic network, the way papers occasionally do when they touch something that a great many people have been thinking about without having the right shape to think it in. It crossed disciplines. Medical researchers passed it to behavioral researchers, who passed it to philosophers, who passed it to linguists, who passed it to cultural historians, who passed it back to the medical researchers with additional notes. Gull, the Veth resilience biologist who had changed her research focus after reading Fenn's incident report, published her own paper 8 weeks after Dr. Wen's. It was longer and more technical, and it engaged directly with her 20 years of prior research to argue that the field of resilience biology had been measuring the wrong thing. It had been measuring how long organisms lasted before the environment won. It had not been adequately studying what happened in organisms that did not appear to frame the situation as a contest. The paper introduced a new term, a working term pending better consensus, which she called quiet continuity. She defined it carefully over several pages, and then at the end of the definition section wrote a single plain sentence. The clearest single example currently available in the documented record is a human woman named Aura, who spent 13.5 months alone on a gray rock and kept a running list of reasons to come home. Aura did not know about the papers for a while. She was home. She had taken 2 weeks of standard reintegration leave on the recommendation of the medical review, not because she needed it in the clinical sense, but because she had not argued about it and the recommendation was reasonable. She spent those 2 weeks doing items from the list. She ate something with salt on the first day. She sat outside when it rained on the 3rd day and stayed out longer than was practical. She called the 7 people who had evacuated from the research station and talked to each of them for a long time, not about what had happened but about other things, ordinary things, because the ordinary things were what she had been missing, and she was not going to skim past them. She sat next to her neighbor one evening on the shared steps outside their building. They did not talk much. The neighbor did not know what Aura had been through, and Aura did not tell her. They just sat in the cooling evening, and the neighbor drank something from a bottle, and Aura looked at the sky, and that was the whole of it. She wrote it in her log that night. She was still writing the log. She had not stopped when she left the planet, and she did not stop when she came home. The habit was part of her now, the way habits become part of people who have kept them long enough without audience. Syl sent her a message 3 weeks after the retrieval. It was a long message, longer than Syl had initially planned it to be, because once she started she found she had been holding a great deal that needed saying. She wrote about what it had been like on the census ship before they found Aura, how quiet the dead zone was, how Fenn had been professionally careful and inwardly restless, and neither of them had said that aloud. She wrote about the sound coming through the wall. She wrote about the moment the translation layer had come up on the audio fragment, and the words of the list had appeared, and she had needed to press her hand over her mouth, because something had moved in her that she had not expected to meet in a dead zone in the Carina Belt. She wrote, "I want you to know that I was already changed by you before we landed. That is the thing I keep thinking about. You were alone for 13.5 months and still you were already changing things from the surface of a planet 3 light hours away just by being the kind of person you are. I don't think you know that. I think that is probably fine, but I wanted you to know that I know it." Aura read the message twice, Then she wrote back. She wrote about the boulder, about going outside in month 4 and sitting on the cold rock and singing, because the box had felt too much like a box, and she needed to remember the outside of it. She wrote that she had not known anyone was listening. She had not thought about being listened to in a very long time because there was no one to listen, and so the thought did not come. She wrote, I kept the list because I needed it. Not for you, not for anything that happened after. I needed it to know what I was working toward. Every time I added something small to it, I was saying to myself, this is real, this will happen, you will get back to this. The list was not hope exactly. It was more like evidence. Evidence that there were things on the other side worth crossing toward. She sent it. Then she looked at her list. The physical written version she had kept in a small notebook in the station, the one she had brought home folded inside her jacket. It was long now, both sides of several pages. She had been working through it slowly, not rushing, because she had learned something about the pleasure of things not yet done. But she had crossed off many items. Salt, rain, sitting next to someone, sill. Near the bottom of the most recent page, there was an item she had added in the last week at home. It said, find out what Finn wrote in his notes. He thought I did not notice him writing for 40 minutes. I noticed. She underlined it. Then she wrote a message to Finn. She wrote, I heard you filed a very long incident report. I would like to read it. Also, I am adding you to the list if you are not already there. You came to a dead zone and landed on a gray rock for a person you had never met. That deserves to be on the list. Finn's response came back in 4 hours. It contained the full text of the report, the additional notes section included, and at the bottom a single line. You are the reason the additional notes section exists. I did not have one before you. Aura read it at her kitchen table with the window open, and the sound of rain coming in and something with salt cooling beside her hand. And she sat there for a long time in the ordinary comfortable noise of being home, and she added one more item to the bottom of the list. It said this, right now this. And she did not cross it off.